people film their lives constantly now.
Hey, y'all need to step back from the road!
Fine.
Capturing everything from extreme sports to simple dance routines. But sometimes, these recordings become the last evidence of someone's final moments alive. In this video, we're looking at 6 cases where cameras documented the buildup to fatal accidents. Ordinary people doing everyday things, unaware that death was waiting just beyond the frame. It was June 18th, 2017, on a narrow Forest Service trail outside Seeley Lake, Montana. Dense pine cover muted the afternoon light, keeping the ground cool and damp in places where snowmelt lingered under fallen needles. The packed dirt trail wound through thick undergrowth, its surface broken by exposed roots and shallow ruts carved by spring runoff. Evan Peterson, 31, was riding alone on his mountain bike, following a familiar loop he had completed multiple times that summer. Friends later said he had been spending more time on the trails after a recent breakup that ended a long-term relationship, using long solo rides to fill quiet evenings and weekends. He preferred routes he already knew, believing familiarity reduced risk. His bike and gear were standard for recreational riding, and he carried no emergency beacon or riding partner that afternoon. The trail narrowed as it curved into a section of dense brush where visibility dropped to only a few yards. Wildlife officers would later note that the area sat within active black bear territory, with several recent sightings logged along nearby service roads. Encounters were uncommon, but not unexpected along isolated trails with limited sight lines. As Evan rounded a blind bend, the helmet-mounted camera first became relevant. The footage jolted abruptly as a black bear crossed the trail at close range, partially obscured by branches. The audio captured a sharp, explosive huff, followed by heavy movement through leaves and snapping undergrowth as the animal reacted to the sudden encounter. Evan responded instinctively, accelerating downhill. The camera shook violently as the bike rattled over roots and embedded rocks. His breathing became fast and uneven, filling the audio as the trail narrowed and speed increased. For several seconds, the footage was chaotic. Trees flashing past, handlebars vibrating under strain. Behind him, the sound of crashing foliage continued briefly, close enough to suggest the bear had moved, though it never re-entered the frame. Investigators later concluded the bear likely made a short defensive bluff charge, a common reaction when startled at close range. Black bears in the region were not known to pursue humans for extended distances, and the tracks recovered indicated the animal disengaged quickly. As Evan picked up speed, the trail steepened into a washed-out section. The camera angle dipped sharply as the front tire struck a raised root at the edge of the eroded slope. Control was lost instantly. The footage lurched sideways, then spun as the bike left the trail. The camera detached during the fall and came to rest several feet uphill, still recording. The audio captured the impact of Evan's body striking the slope below, followed by the hollow clatter of the bike tumbling through brush. After that, only the wind moving through the trees remained. When Evan failed to return home that evening, family members contacted authorities. Search and rescue teams located him the following morning, approximately 30 yards downslope from the trail. The coroner determined he died from severe blunt force trauma consistent with a high-speed downhill crash. Wildlife officers found fresh black bear tracks near the encounter point, but no evidence of an attack. The death was ruled accidental, caused by loss of control during flight from a perceived threat. It was August 12th, 2019, on a frontage service road near Interstate 35, outside Waco, Texas. The late afternoon heat had reached 97 degrees, creating shimmering mirages on the asphalt as traffic moved at highway speeds just yards from the roadside. The frontage road lacked pedestrian barriers and was frequently misused for stopping, creating ongoing safety concerns for local authorities. Lila Brooks, 19, and Nia Collins, 20, were community college students working part-time retail jobs to support their education. They had planned to film a brief dance routine inspired by viral roadside choreography trends, popular on social media platforms, hoping to gain followers for their shared account. The location they chose was a service road strip adjacent to the main highway, where passing vehicles maintained speeds of 65 to 70 miles per hour, despite the proximity to pedestrian areas. Multiple drivers honked their horns as the pair set up their phone against a utility sign, propping it at an angle to capture both dancers and the highway backdrop. A pedestrian waiting at a nearby bus stop shouted for them to move farther from the roadway. citing the proximity to high-speed traffic and the lack of protective barriers. The students acknowledged the warnings, but proceeded with their planned recording, believing they had maintained sufficient distance from the travel lanes. The phone was positioned to record the routine as traffic continued past in both directions. The recording shows both participants performing choreographed movements while vehicles passed in the background, creating the dynamic visual effect they sought for their social media content. At 3:42 p.m., as the music continued and they maintained their choreography near the routine's climax, a male emerged from a side street and began shouting incoherently before rushing toward the filming location. Later, toxicology confirmed acute alcohol intoxication with a blood alcohol content of 0.18, more than twice the legal limit. The phone continued recording as the situation escalated abruptly. The footage captured the initial moments of the confrontation as the attacker struck both women, then shoved Lila backward onto the roadway before the phone was knocked over during the struggle, limiting visual documentation of the incident. A rideshare driver stopped at a nearby traffic light, witnessed the assault, and immediately called 911, along with multiple other bystanders who observed the scene from different vantage points. The assault unfolded in seconds before bystanders intervened. Emergency responders arrived within 6 minutes of the initial 911 calls. Leila was pronounced dead at the scene from severe head trauma sustained after striking the roadway. Nia survived after being struck during the assault, suffering facial fractures and a concussion, and was transported to a regional trauma center where she underwent emergency surgery. The phone was displaced early in the struggle, limiting usable visual evidence. The coroner's report documented fatal skull fractures and intracranial hemorrhage caused by impact with a hard surface, consistent with the victim being struck and forced to the ground. The attacker was identified as Marcus Hill, 45, who was arrested at the scene and later charged with manslaughter due to intoxication at the time of the assault. Court records show Hill was convicted and sentenced to 25 years in state prison. The phone video was retained as evidence throughout the investigation and trial. It was never uploaded to any social media platform and remains in police custody as part of the permanent case file. It was February 18th, 2018, off the Batangas coast in the Philippines. Morning conditions showed calm surface waters with moderate visibility extending to approximately 65 feet, though local dive operators noted unpredictable currents beyond the main reef structure that could shift without warning. Water temperature was 78 degrees Fahrenheit at the surface, dropping to 72 degrees below the thermocline at 60 feet. Marco Villanueva, 32, was an auto parts salesman and newly certified recreational diver who had completed his open water certification just 3 months prior. He wore a wrist-mounted action camera to document the initial phases of his dives for a small private Facebook group of local diving enthusiasts, sharing footage primarily with family and close friends. His certification included basic training but limited experience in current-affected waters or deeper diving scenarios. The dive guide briefed the group of 6 divers on staying within the designated reef area, specifically advising against drifting toward deeper water due to unpredictable thermoclines and current patterns that could disorient inexperienced divers. The briefing emphasized buddy system protocols and maximum depth limits of 60 feet for the planned reef exploration. Marco acknowledged the briefing and activated his camera as the group entered the water from the dive boat. The camera recorded the descent and early exploration near the reef structure, showing clear water conditions and abundant marine life. Footage shows Marco following the group initially, maintaining proper buoyancy and depth control as taught in his certification course. At approximately 11:15 a.m., a large sea turtle appeared and began swimming toward deeper water beyond the reef boundary. Marco pursued the turtle, gradually separating from the main group as he followed it toward the thermocline depth. At approximately 11:23 a.m., as he drifted beyond the reef boundary and approached the 65-foot mark, the camera recording abruptly ended, likely due to battery depletion or accidental shutoff during movement. Fellow divers later reported briefly seeing Marco's fins disappear below the thermocline before losing visual contact entirely. Investigators later noted that a downward current beyond the reef, combined with task fixation and inexperienced buoyancy control, likely pulled him deeper than planned. The sudden temperature drop and reduced visibility below the thermocline created disorienting conditions for inexperienced divers. When he failed to rejoin the group at the designated meeting point after 15 minutes, the dive guide initiated immediate search protocols according to established emergency procedures. Surface support was notified via emergency whistle signals, and additional dive teams were deployed within the hour. Search teams located Marco approximately 6 hours later in deeper water beyond the reef structure at a depth of 85 feet. The wrist strap detached after entanglement in reef structure, and his inactive camera was found during the recovery operation. The recovered footage showed normal diving behavior up to the point where recording ceased, with no indication of distress, equipment malfunction, or unusual circumstances. The coroner's report documented drowning as the primary cause of death, with contributing factors including increased air consumption from exertion and cold exposure below the thermocline, followed by disorientation after separation from the group. Investigators noted that depth-related nitrogen narcosis may have further impaired judgment and awareness, particularly given his inexperience and exposure to colder water below the thermocline. Official findings cited separation from the group, environmental factors, and insufficient experience with current conditions and deeper water diving. The dive footage was provided to Marco's family and was never shared publicly or posted to social media platforms. Following the incident, the dive operator implemented mandatory buddy system protocols and restricted access to areas beyond the main reef for newly certified divers. It was November 8, 2015, at a mid-rise apartment complex in Dayton, Ohio. The building had recently installed closed-circuit television in common areas, following a series of break-ins reported to local police over the previous 3 months. The new security system included cameras in stairwells, lobbies, and parking areas, but not in hallways directly outside apartment units due to privacy concerns and budget constraints. Renee Lawson, 34, was a home health aide and mother of one with limited online presence who worked irregular shifts caring for elderly clients throughout the city. Building residents had previously reported domestic disturbances involving Renee and her live-in partner, John White, to management and police on at least 4 occasions over the past 6 months, with complaints ranging from shouting to sounds of physical altercations. On the evening in question, neighbors observed Renee leaving her apartment hurriedly and descending the main stairwell in apparent distress. The newly installed stairwell camera captured Renee exiting her 4th-floor unit at 8:43 p.m. and moving quickly down the stairs toward the building exit. She appeared to be carrying a small bag and moved with urgency, frequently looking back toward the upper floors. The camera angle covered only the public stairwell area, with no view into individual apartment units or the hallway directly outside her door. Footage shows her reaching the 2nd-floor landing before the recording captures her being forcibly turned around and directed back toward the upper floors by an unidentified male figure, later identified as her live-in partner. Residents on multiple floors reported hearing shouting and sounds of a physical struggle emanating from the stairwell and upper hallway areas. The disturbance escalated quickly, with sounds of impact against walls and continued verbal altercation. Multiple tenants called 911, reporting a domestic disturbance in progress, with calls beginning at 8:45 p.m. Calls were coded as an active domestic disturbance requiring immediate response. The stairwell camera continued recording ambient hallway sounds, but captured no visual evidence of the altercation, which moved beyond the camera's fixed viewing angle into areas not covered by the security system. Police arrived approximately 8 minutes after the initial 911 calls and discovered Renee deceased inside her apartment unit. Officers forced entry through the locked door after receiving no response to repeated knocking and announcements. The fatal assault had occurred entirely within the apartment, outside the range of the stairwell surveillance system. John White, her 36-year-old live-in partner, was present in the unit at the time of entry and was detained at the scene. Officers noted visible signs of a recent physical altercation. The coroner's report documented severe blunt force trauma to the head and neck, with multiple skull fractures and cervical injuries consistent with repeated impact against hard surfaces. Death was attributed to traumatic brain injury resulting from blunt force assault, with findings indicating intense and repeated violence rather than a single blow. White was later charged with murder in connection with Renee's death and was ultimately convicted, receiving a sentence of 30 years to life in state prison. Renee's child, who was not present in the apartment at the time of the incident, was placed in the care of extended family following the investigation. The surveillance footage corroborated timelines established through witness testimony, prior police reports, and multiple 911 call recordings during the prosecution. The video was never released publicly and remains part of the court record. Following the conviction, building management expanded camera coverage to additional common areas and implemented enhanced security protocols. It was July 21, 2018. At a regional amusement park in eastern Pennsylvania. The afternoon ran under normal summer conditions, with clear skies, light winds, and temperatures reaching 84 degrees. The park was busy but orderly, operating under standard safety procedures. State inspection records showed the park had passed all required mechanical reviews, with no serious ride incidents reported in the previous 5 years. Thomas Eberly, 41, was an HVAC technician and father of 2, attending his extended family's annual summer reunion at the park. While his children stayed with relatives in another section, Thomas chose to ride several of the park's more intense attractions on his own. He wore a chest-mounted action camera, a habit he had picked up on previous outings, mainly to record ride departures and pre-drop moments to show his kids later. He was not filming for an audience. The roller coaster Thomas selected was one of the park's fastest rides, featuring high-speed turns and sustained lateral forces. Before boarding, a ride attendant reminded passengers to secure loose items and confirm restraints were properly fastened. Thomas adjusted his camera mount and pulled the over-the-shoulder restraint down until it clicked into place. The restraint appeared secure, and the secondary seatbelt was not flagged by the operator during the final visual check. The train departed the station shortly after 3:15 p.m. The camera recorded the slow rollout and the climb toward the lift hill. The footage showed nothing unusual. Riders chatting, the steady clatter of the chain lift, and the track rising above the surrounding park. As the train crested the hill and tipped forward into the first drop, the camera's view shifted downward. The image became dominated by Thomas's harness and chest area, suggesting the mount had rotated under vibration and wind pressure. Audio continued briefly, capturing rushing wind and track noise, but no usable visuals remained. Witnesses seated nearby later told investigators that the train completed the first drop normally. During the second major turn, the unsecured restraint allowed Thomas's upper body to rise from the seat, and he was thrown forcefully against the internal structure of the train. Several riders reported hearing a sharp impact sound from his row, followed almost immediately by the activation of the ride's automatic emergency braking system. The train decelerated and came to a controlled stop along the track. Ride operators initiated emergency procedures and began evacuating passengers. Thomas was found slumped in his seat, unresponsive, with visible signs of severe trauma. Emergency responders arrived within minutes and transported him to a regional trauma center. During transport, he remained unconscious, with no signs of recovery. Investigators later determined that the restraint on Thomas's seat had not been fully engaged at dispatch. Although it appeared locked, mechanical wear in the ratcheting mechanism allowed excessive movement under high G-forces. During the second major turn, the unsecured restraint permitted Thomas to rise partially from his seat, causing a violent impact against the train's internal structure. Sensors detected abnormal movement and triggered the emergency braking system as designed. At the hospital, Thomas was pronounced dead from injuries sustained during the ride. The coroner's report documented fatal blunt force trauma, including severe head and upper body injuries consistent with high-energy impact during partial ejection. Death was attributed to traumatic injuries, not braking forces or a medical event. The attraction was closed immediately. Inspection reports cited maintenance failures related to restraint wear and verification procedures. The action camera footage confirmed normal conditions prior to the incident and was retained as evidence. The ride remained closed until corrective maintenance and full state recertification were completed. It was March 14th, 2017, at an abandoned grain facility outside Salina, Kansas. The structure had been vacant for over a decade, with visible deterioration in the upper levels and posted warnings regarding structural instability throughout the property. Recent weather had included heavy rains and freeze-thaw cycles that further compromised the building's already weakened support structures. Eric Nolan, 29, was a freelance videography hobbyist who worked night shifts as a security guard at a local industrial complex. He had arrived at the facility to film brief establishing shots for an urban exploration project he planned to share with online communities dedicated to documenting abandoned structures. His initial plan was to limit recording to exterior and entry footage only, avoiding the more dangerous upper levels that showed obvious signs of structural compromise. However, after entering the building, he decided to move upward to capture interior shots where light filtered through damaged sections of the roof. No trespassing signs were visible at multiple entry points, along with warnings about structural hazards issued by county authorities following a previous incident at the site. Eric acknowledged these warnings, but proceeded to enter the building through a ground-level access point where previous explorers had created an unofficial entrance. He activated his camera upon entering the upper level of the facility, drawn by the dramatic lighting and architectural details visible through damaged sections of the roof. The camera recorded Eric moving through the upper floor and panning across exposed ceiling beams and deteriorated flooring that showed significant water damage and rot. The footage reveals multiple areas where floorboards had already failed, creating gaps that expose the structural framework below. At 4:22 p.m., he briefly repositioned the camera for interior framing, seeking to capture the interplay of natural light and industrial decay that characterized the space. The recording cut off abruptly mid-movement as the camera jolted, ending the footage without capturing what followed. Investigators later determined that, moments after the footage ended, the upper floor beneath Eric failed, causing him to fall with the collapsing structure. Other explorers were surveying the exterior only when they reported hearing a heavy crash and feeling vibrations through the structure that shook the ground around the building's foundation. They observed dust venting from upper-level windows and immediately called emergency services, reporting a possible structural collapse with someone potentially trapped inside. The sound was consistent with a significant structural collapse within the building, involving multiple support beams and flooring sections. Emergency responders delayed entry due to ongoing structural instability concerns and the risk of additional collapse. Shoring operations were conducted to stabilize the affected area before rescue teams could safely access the collapse zone. Specialized urban search and rescue equipment was deployed to navigate the debris field safely. Eric was located several hours later beneath debris from the collapsed upper floor, in an area where multiple ceiling joists had failed simultaneously. The coroner's report documented severe blunt force trauma and crushing injuries consistent with structural collapse involving heavy timber and masonry materials. Death was attributed to multiple traumatic injuries, including skull fractures and thoracic compression from falling debris, with injuries indicating death was instantaneous. The camera footage was recovered and provided to Eric's family after the investigation concluded. The recording was never uploaded to any platform or shared within urban exploration communities. Authorities classified the death as accidental, occurring during unauthorized entry into a structurally compromised building. The facility was subsequently demolished due to safety concerns. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.